You ever stretch and it's just like it just takes all the energy out of you? That's just what happened to me right now. Jesus. Alright, let's go. It was not easy. First I had to convince them I was strong enough to leave. Then I convinced them we could catch up to Chief Ibrahim if we left immediately. When words failed, I waved my big wet wad of James Flood's money before his two old men, and he nodded. Two young men, Charles and Peter, eager and full of expressions, set out with me in one of the village's few river-worthy boats, and we headed north, hoping Chief Ibrahim and his clan hadn't already put too much distance between themselves and us. Charles, it turns out, was one of those who had taken Solomon and Isabel to Chief Ibrahim. He said Chief Ibrahim and his people had left their settlement late previous night, preparing to travel under the cover of darkness, and by his estimate that put them at least 10 hours ahead of us. But because they had children and women, they'd be forced to stop often. If they went hard without a pause, we carried 2 extra gallons of petrol to avoid stopping for refills. We could catch up to them before sunset. As we passed the floodplain where Chief Ibrahim's village has once stood, I told the two men to slow down for a minute. The place looked desolate. The only signs the community had once thrived here were a few sticks jutting out from the water, pieces of straw from roof thatches scattered on the mud, and pile of garbage on a tree that was a wall. We caught up with them very late in the afternoon, and by now I was almost fainting from fatigue and weakness. My guides had offered me many times to stop and rest, but I had insisted we keep going. And now they had to hold me under their arms and I get off the boat. The group was camped in a forest not so far from the river, their boats laden with their meager belongings, waited near the trees and rocks on the banks. They had set up tents and sheds. The curious faces peered out in the doorway slits as we passed, some nodding in recognition. Young men and women and children sat on the trees, eating and playing, or just idly waiting for the nightfall, and they'd be on their move. Chief Ibrahim's tent lay a few meters from the others. Good to see your face again, the reporter. You too, Chief Ibrahim. He was seated on his reclining chair, his radio on the side table. I sat on a mat facing him, and for a second it seemed time had not moved an inch since that day when the old man and his son had first brought Zach to me to this community. The same cloth chair, the same radio by his side, and somewhere in the imaginary back room I could hear women and children talking and laughing. Only this time there was no Zach, and this time it was I who was slumped and bowed like Zach had been that day. And all along, the old man, Tamuno, and his son Michael, where were they? They returned safely. They're fine. They're out there somewhere. Good to hear. And what if your friend Zach? I left him at Edifique. He's not well. You also don't look well, reporter. I'll be fine. I'm on my way to Port Harcourt, or I'll see a doctor. And you? I see you're on the move again. Yes. You couldn't remain there anymore. And people, they're frightened, and the violence gets closer every day. You've heard of a place not too far from Port Harcourt. The people there are friendly. Most of them are refugees like us. My people could get some sort of work in Port Harcourt. His voice was hopeful, but his eyes were pessimistic, cloudy. Gradually, the community was drifting towards the big city, and sooner or later it would be swallowed up. Its people dispersed like people getting off a bus and joining the traffic on a city streets, he sighed. You came for the white woman, didn't you? Do you want to see her now? Can I? At least I was going to see Isabel Flood, and I didn't have a pen or notepad or my camera. I tried to control my nervousness as I followed Chief Ibrahim out of his tent to the shed. She was in a tent by herself, seated up on what looked like a folded trampoline. Beside her was a half-covered bowl with half-eaten meal in it. She was staring out at the trees through the door slit. She didn't seem at all surprised to see us. Perhaps her recent experiences had exhausted her capacity for surprise, which I could understand. Now she looked up with dull, locked-in expression, waiting for us to speak. This is Rufus, a journalist. He's come to see you. As the mention of journalist, a spark of interest entered her eyes. His job done. Chief Ibrahim nodded at me, turned and left us. Now I saw how thin she looked. Her hair had been chopped off and jagged, and the jagged edges hung evenly over her ears. An old hair had been chopped. A red blouse that didn't seem to belong for her hung from her shoulders, and her collarbones jutted out, stretching the skin. Her face was covered in rashes. The skin was still slightly discolored from whatever dye she had used to disguise her skin while making her escape from the kidnappers. But it was her eyes that expressed her situation best. They looked hollow, lusterless, and even when they rested directly on you, they did so bluntly, never cutting below the surface. She was about 40 years old, but right now she looked 10 years older. My name is Rufus. I'm from the Reporter. Hello, I'm Isabel Flood. Yes, Mrs. Flood, your husband sent me. Us, me and my friend. No, I'm alone here at the moment. We've been searching for you for more than 2 weeks now. James sent you. Yes, he sent us to see you were alive and well, and, if possible, to negotiate your ransom. But now that you're free, yes, I'm free. I noticed her attention to keep waving. Her eyes were fixed at the little silt through which a line of light came in tent, and wondered what she was staring at outside, or she was expecting someone to come charging in. I felt awkward, unsure how to behave with her. But I asked. I had always imagined she'd be unsure how to behave with her. What to say or ask. I was always imagining she'd be surrounded by gun-tuning militians when I met her, and that I always assumed Zach would be there with me, and we'd do all the talking. Not in my wildest imaginings did I ever see myself sitting less than a meter from her, alone in a tent by the river, carrying the burden of the conversation. But I was a reporter, and this is what reporters do. I'm improvised, look confident and poised. Mrs. Flood really wanted to be here. Mr. Flood really wanted to be here himself, but because of security, she said nothing and kept staring at us in the same spot. I know you're tired. If you'd rather rest. Now she turned to me and saw how unexpected a comment had taken her by surprise. She shook her head. No, I could talk. What do you want to know? Well, how did you do it? How did you manage to escape? It wasn't that hard. Solomon was able to overpower the guard. He bashed him on the head with a stone, and we slipped away. I guess they weren't expecting us to try something so crazy. Yes, Solomon. Why did he help you escape? He kidnapped you in the first place, didn't he? It's complicated. What do you mean? He didn't actually kidnap me. He didn't? Well, the police are looking for him. He's a primary suspect. Look, you have to ask Solomon for some of the details of what happened that day. He was out there somewhere. What I could tell you is what I know. Okay, that's all right. Please go ahead, Mrs. Flute. Sorry, didn't mean to snap at you, but everything is so. I expected to die back there, you know. I still find it hard to believe I'm here, almost safe, on my way to Port Harcourt. When I decided to come to this country, the last thing on my mind was to get kidnapped. Of course, I had been advised about the risk of coming to Nigeria to Port Harcourt. The embassy had shown me all the newspaper clippings about abducted foreigners, but I didn't pay much attention. I was coming on a special mission. I was coming to save my marriage. She paused and looked at me, her eyes expressionless. I had read somewhere that she was a school teacher. Perhaps her husband had told me, and her eyes made me feel like an erring student waiting for a judgment. Rufus, I'm telling you all this just to put everything in perspective. I know you must have risked a lot to be here, so you deserve to know everything. Perhaps my husband has told you some of it already, but it doesn't matter. Although I expected you to use your judgment to know what to print out and what to leave out. I nodded. She turned to me and continued her story. She had met Flute at university. He was in his final year and she had been a year behind. They got married a year after she graduated. The first years were happy ones. He worked for a chemical company in London, and he got his present job. And that was when things began to change. He was a gifted petroleum engineer, and his skills were in great demand. He began to travel a lot. Over the past 3 years, he had lived in 5 different countries: Hong Kong, Indonesia, Canada, and Netherlands, and now Nigeria. At first, she happily went with him to each new place, but after Canada, she suddenly lost interest. Why go all that distance only to stay at home watching TV or shopping at the mall, never seeing him till late in the evening? So when he got posted to the Netherlands, they decided it was best if she stayed with his mother in Newcastle. But 6 months later, she was out of the Netherlands on his way to Nigeria. When she asked him if he was happy with the way things were, if he would perhaps think of another line of work for the sake of their marriage, he told her Nigeria would be only 2 years, then he would retire. He was being paid a lot of money to go there because of the dangerous conditions. But then she met someone else. It was nothing serious. Nothing actually happened, but I got her thinking. I realized how lonely I had been all this time. What we had, me and James, couldn't really be called a marriage. At first, we used to phone every day, but then many days would pass without a word from him. He always claimed that that the infrastructure in Nigeria was just awful. Well, I had a brilliant idea. I was going to have a baby. I was going to go to Nigeria on a surprise visit, get pregnant, and everything would be fine. At first, he was pretty happy to see me. But every day he came home early from work, there were invitations from other families for cocktails and garden parties, and trips to Lagos and Abuja. In the evenings, they sat on the verdada and his view of the distant sea and eat, refreshed by the sea breeze. But then abruptly, things changed. A bomb exploded at his office. And the next day, an Italian worker was kidnapped. He started coming home late, saying things were crazy at the office, and he had to be there all the time. After a month of waiting for things to change, of going to the club to play tennis, some of the wives of slipping sherry under the umbrellas by the pool alone, she realized that was it, and things were not going to change. When in desperation, I told him about my intention to get pregnant. He said it was out of the question, and then he told me he was seeing someone else. He didn't say whom. I shared it was one of the many experienced women I always saw at the club. He told me he wanted a divorce. I kept nodding, keeping my expression pleasant and interested, comparing what she was telling me what their husband told me. I tried to calm my excitement. I was being handed a major scoop, and although I had no pen or recorder, I was storing every word, every inflection in her voice. Boys said the affair had been going on for a while, and that she was pregnant. You can imagine how I felt. Shock. It was as if a cloud had risen in the room, roaring and blocking out every other thing, and I couldn't see. I needed to be alone to think. It was late at night, and I didn't know the roads very well. The driver, Solomon, always took me out, but I didn't care. I took the car and went to the club. My plan was to leave for London the next morning. She was surprised to find that Solomon to had come to look for her. At first, she thought he was waiting to drive her home, but then she noticed he wasn't wearing his black and blue uniform. Hey, Solomon. Solomon? She realized she had always referred to him as Solomon and he never corrected her till now. Oh, sorry, it's okay. No problem. Did James send you? No, madam. I came here to talk to you about something serious. He looked at this, and then sounded sooner. He looked and sounded different. He was wearing a jacket, a bit tighter on the shoulders, and gave him a more formal air than the uniform ever did. And he wasn't speaking the usual pidgin English that she found so irksome, that had always had to exp- and that always had to be explained to her. Today he spoke a grammatically faultless English, and even the accent was modified, easy to understand. Later she discovered that he was an actually university graduate who, like a lot of young men in Delta, had been forced to take a job far below his qualifications while he waited for the elusive office job with the oil company. She gave him the car keys and they drove. She had no idea where they were going, but she didn't care. Something told her she was about to hear wasn't going to be pleasant. He said nothing as he drove, but she could feel him watching her in the car mirror. Finally, he stopped in what looked like a roadside motel. Can I drink here? Yes, my uncle owns this place. Good, I have a whiskey. He led her into a deserted bar, and they sat in a dark corner. The bartender glanced briefly at them, returned to reading his magazine. Salomon went to the bar and returned with her drink. Thanks. Are you having anything? No, madam. I'm fine. Okay, what is it? It's about Coco. Coco, what about Coco? Coco was a maid. She cooked and cleaned 3 days a week. Coco's my fiance. Yesterday she told me she was pregnant. I looked mournful and uncomfortable. He sat stiffly on the edge of the seat, and he avoided her eyes and spoke. Well, Solomon, congratulations. But I'm in no mood to celebrate. No, not by me. She was pregnant by Olga. She didn't feel anger or sadness. She'd already exhausted emotion. The night before, she only felt surprise. She had been unable to detect what was going on right under her nose. She felt sadness, not for herself, but for Solomon. Do you love her? He nodded. The bitterness not plain in his face, making his mouth twist aside. His eyes turned red and teary. I loved her. I'm sorry. It's not fair. How can Olga do this to me? I respected him. I trusted her. See what he did to me? Why? I want to know why. Can you please tell me? And suddenly, I feel like seeing James again. I didn't feel like seeing James again. I didn't want to go home. I couldn't. I told Solomon to take me to any good hotel, and he suggested I stay there at my uncle's motel. And you weren't scared of staying there? You trusted Solomon that much? I guess I did. I'd known him for over 6 months by then, and it was a good motel. Really, it was quite clean. But most importantly, it was the last place James would come looking for me. Well, why didn't you go back to the club? Because that was the first place James would come looking for me. And I didn't want to see him. My fellow exa- ex- expatriates with their phony smiles laughing at me behind my back. I just wanted to be alone. I gave Solomon a note for James. I told him to give Solomon my things, and I was leaving the next day, and I would call him when I got to London, and James interrupted by a hand parting the cell in the tenant's entrance, and a face peeped in. It was a young girl. A Lali, and she entered a single item of clothing, held gingerly in her hand. Isabel took it. It was a blouse, and she put it beside her on the mat. She smiled up at the girl, who smiled back, and skipped out of the tent. I waited for her to resume where she stopped, and as I waited nervously, she returned. She told me a great deal, but there wasn't still a lot more to tell. What if she didn't want to go on? How could I persuade her to finish the story? So far, although all I had was one half of a story. What could I do with it if I didn't get the other half? She closed her eyes and held her one palm before her. She wasn't well, it was obvious. Mrs. Flood, are you alright? Do you need a rest? We can continue later. She nodded gratefully. Yes, please. I have a crushing headache. I left. It was a long way to Port Harcourt, and I was sure there'd be another opportunity to finish the interview. Besides, I was also feeling tired. The initial burst of energy I had felt she granted me. The interview was dissipating. I met the girl outside and shaking with Tumuno and Michael. They were by the water, stripped to the waist, working on a boat, patching holes with tar and scraping mud from the bottom. Other men were equally busy getting their boats ready for departure. The old man took his hand and pumped it energetically. The boy wrapped his arms around my waist for a moment. I was reminded how he had done the same to Zach when Zach agreed to take him back to Fort Harcourt. Now I wondered if that promise had ever been kept. But where are Olga and Zach? You come alone? I sat next to them and told them about Irikife, about the fallen statues and the burned houses, about the injured worshippers, about the injured worshippers held more or less as prisoners by the company soldiers. They worked as I talked, and the water and the river flowed, and the men came and went, calling out to each other. And for a moment, I believed, and my adventure was over, and by this time tomorrow I'd be in a hardcore, perhaps writing my story, safe and wiser from my experiences. But that was a dangerous thought, an illusion, like a drowning man letting down his guard at the sight of shore, deceived by the promise of safety, and drowning as a consequence. We were so deep in militia territory, and as to remind me of this, the militians came. They must have been watching us and waiting as we were for nightfall. They waited until all the boats were loaded and everyone was on board, about to set out before they appeared. The roar of their speed was deafening, and their glare was of their flashlights blinding our eyes and threw the women and children into the panic and confusion. Some of the women and children started to jump into the shallow water. Some threw themselves below the benches. Rebel the cries and wails of women. Even Med once rose and tried to maintain calm. It was Chief Abrams from the lead boat. I could see his silhouette as he stood up, his arms raised. Calm down, sit still, everyone, sit still. The militias said nothing and continued to circle their boats, blocking all the avenues of sudden escape. And at last, when the noise had gone down a bit, a man in one of the boats stood up and shouted over the water, "We want the white woman now. Give us the white woman and her driver, and we won't harm you. If you don't, we sink all your boats and we set fire to your things. If you think say not joke, try us." I was in Tamuno's boat with Isabel and Solomon. We were sitting side by side, and behind us, father and son watched and waited in silence. I waited, and then one man started to count. 1, 2, 3. The third count was accompanied by gunfire aimed at the cloudy night sky. Isabel stood up, holding onto my shoulder for balance. I could feel her hand shook, and she spoke her words in an almost sob. I'm here. Please don't shoot. I'm here." Then I fell on her. She removed the black scarf covering her chopped hair, and with the other hand she covered her eyes from the blinding flashlight. "Bring her here. Now." This was accompanied by another wild gunshot into the sky. The old man lowered his oar into the water and rowed. Slowly he went past the other boats, past the neutral space between our men and the militias, and then we were there with them. 2 men jumped out of the boat, still holding their guns on us, and helped Isabel out into the boat. "Where's the driver?" Solomon stood up and I'm trying to get out. Fell into the water and came up again, gasping for breath. The 2 men pulled him and pushed him into the seat next to Isabel. And then, when we thought it was over, the leader of the militias let off another shot into the sky. "Chief Ibram, why did you do this? Are you now on their side? Are you trying to get her back to her ward? Is that so?" "It is not so. Only trying to help her. She came to us and begged." "She came to you? And then you should have known what to do. Tell me, what should you have done if my prisoner escapes and comes to you?" "I can't hear you. Louder." "So it'll come to you. I'm sorry. It's not happen again." "You're right. It will not happen again. To make sure it doesn't, take one of you with me, just as insurance. When we are sure you haven't gone to the government soldiers to betray us, he will be released. You decide who." I noticed Samuno inching closer to his son and putting a protective arm around him. I was sure behind me. In the other boats, mothers were wrapping their arms around their children and fathers were lowering their heads in anxiety. "Chief, you're waiting. 1, 2, 3. Again, a flash and a rude sound of gunfire followed silence. I could imagine Chief Ephraim in his boat, and a million things going around his mind. "Well, if no one's willing to come, you'll take this boy here." And the 2 men jumped on the water and came to our boat. "No, I beg, please, no." The sound came from an old man as the men approached their boat. He threw himself at them as he began to drag Michael out the boat, his puny arms rising, falling ineffectually against the men's burly flames. But still he fought them. His rage turning up the water, the boy grabbed tightly onto my arm, screeching for his father. I saw a gun raise and then descend onto the old man's head, and he slumped against the boat and then into the water. Slowly I stood up, my arms raised. An image of the boy proudly scrawling his name into my sand came to mind. It seemed like just yesterday the old man served us diligently in the hope that we'd take his son to poor hardcore and for a better future, and instead we had led him to incarceration and being doused in petrol. Now the old man lay face up in the water, and his son was about to be taken away. "Oh, go. Take me. Leave the boy alone." I got into the water and helped Tamuno back into the boat. Then the 2 men took my arms and waded the boat and waded to their boat. They showed me in beside Solomon and Israel. They were masters of the waterways. They knew every turning, every shallow, every rapid. Many times I expected the boat to crash in some shallowy form, looming suddenly in front of us, a tree or rock, but our boat would effortlessly curve away into the darkness and into an open expanse of the water, and the men would let their guns roar as if in defiance of danger and death. They were 5 boats and 4 men in each, all armed, all eager to shoot off a few rounds in the slightest opportunity. Solomon, Isabel, and I hung on for dear life as the boats ate up the trunk. I had to expect a blindfold, but nobody paid me and our fellow prisoners any attention once we left Chief Ibrahim and his people. Our destination turned out to be closer than I anticipated. We were there in under 30 minutes, and even in the water I could appreciate how impregnable the approach to land was. It was one solid slab of granite rising sheer from the water, and not till we left the boats did I see the tiny steps cut into the rock face. It looked no more than hand and toe holes, but they were cut in curling zigzag, making the climb easier than one would have expected, and yet so daunting to someone not fully recovered from a fever and hungry and prodded by guns in the back and sure of what ever lay in store. Our arrival was announced by more gunshots and whoops and calls, but the camp was clearly asleep. A few fires blared out to illuminate the makeshift sheds and tents. 2 sentries appeared suddenly from behind us, their presence indicated only by the inevitable cigarette between their lips. Solomon and I were dumped under the tree while Isabel was led away to a group of tents. Although we couldn't see any guards in our immediate vicinity, I knew they were there, shadowy, watching, waiting. I turned to my companion, but he had dragged himself to the foot of the tree and now was seated his back against it. Instead lowered to his knees, and after a while I realized he was sobbing. Solomon, are you alright? I said nothing and decided to let him cry in peace. I could imagine how terrified he must be. After all, he had helped the wound escape. You know, a terrible punishment waited for him in the morning. He hoped he would be composed enough to grant me an interview before they came for him. For us, I was aware that unless I could prove I was a journalist, that I could be useful to militians with my piece. My fate wouldn't be any better than Solomon's. I lay on my back and closed my eyes. But that night, sleep didn't come easy. In the morning, I was awakened by a kick to the ribs. I sat up, holding my aching side, and I saw a man with a gun standing over me. He said nothing, only motioning from his gun. He wanted me to stand up. I stood up. Solomon was already on his feet, and from his swollen and bloodshot eyes, I could tell he couldn't sleep much last night. Let's go. Another gunman appeared and led the way to the center of the camp. The militians were already awake and busy. Men and women crawled in and out of the canvas tents. Others sat or stood under the trees in groups, talking and smoking and clearing their guns. All seemed to be dressed in black, some wearing headbands and some wearing masks. Keep walking. We went deeper into the camp, away from the river, and as we went, the trees grew denser. Our paths grew narrower. I kept looking around, trying to spot Isabel and Gloria. We passed a group standing before an open fire. From the smell of the meat they were roasting reached my legs, almost buckled. I hadn't eaten since yesterday. We passed another group standing in a circle, singing in loud, distorted voices. And when I recognized the song as one from my long ago Sunday school, I did so with shock. A tall man with gray hair stood in the center of the circle, frenziedly waving a Bible in the air, his eyes closed, leading the song. Our escorts finally led us to another group sitting under the leafless tree, standing by itself in a large circular clearing. There were already about half a dozen men sitting up under the tree. They were all looked abject and forlorn. At the edge of the clearing, I saw 2 militians sitting on boulders, guns laying on the grass beside them. Sit here. I was glad to sit, for my legs could barely support me. When I regained my breath, I turned to the men around me. They all started back at me, prisoners, like me. I wondered if they were being held for ransom, or if they had simply fallen foul of the professor and being kept here in the open as punishment. As I turned away from their faces, I noticed the footpaths leading away into a densely wooded area, and now I could hear voices coming from that direction. I wondered if there was an extension to the camp, and if there were more prisoners being held there. We sat for hours. We watched the shadows under the trees shift and grow larger, and still no one came to talk to us. We watched the camp going about its regular business. Every once in a while, a militia would step forward and release a shot into the air. Almost casually, his friends would cheer him briefly before resuming whatever they were doing. Solomon still sat away from me, his head bowed. At last, I stood up and faced the guards, and when immediately he stepped towards me, his gun raised. I needed to stretch my legs. I have cramps. I went over and stood next to him. My name is Rufus. I'm a reporter. It's important that I speak to a professor. I have an urgent message for him. He looked at me, and I could see he was trying to decide whether I was joking or not. He was young, about 20. He had cross eyes, and I could tell he was staring unblinkingly at me or something else. But his gun was without a doubt pointed at my gut. He didn't look threatening. He even smiled at me when I asked for his name. Joseph. People call me Joe. Which paper you work for? The Reporter. So you be a reporter, and you work for a reporter? Yes. Funny. He nodded, smiling widely. I really have to see Professor. No worry. You go see him. He day busy right now. Joseph continued to stare over my shoulder and point the gun at me. When I got tired of standing, I sat down. One of the men dragged himself over carefully. reclining on one elbow. As I turned away from him, he tapped me on the shoulder. I was surprised at a sudden show of interest. Are you really a journalist? Yes. I raised my head. A line of men, 10 men, appearing for the path. They were talking excitedly. All carried sacks over shoulders. They were ready for something big. What? And I turned to the man and looked at him closely for the first time. His hollow eyes were like those of Holly anchoret, who has fasted for days and reached that stage of numbness for which there was no return. Perhaps by electric shock, without thinking, I stood up and made my narrow path. The guards and made for the narrow path. The guards, surprised, didn't react till I had gone a few meters. Then Joseph ran to me and held me by my hand. Smiled the wide smile on his face. After the professor, Joseph was roughly pushed aside by the other guard, a short, stout fellow with red, merciless eyes who stood firmly on the path. He threw away his cigarette into the bush, moved closer to me till his gun made contact with my chest. Where do you think say you they go? That's the professor. I'm a reporter. Go back before I blast you to hell. I'm back. Reclining man tapped me again on my shoulders. Well, you're a very rare man. He stared directly at me as I found my face to their few tree branches, leaving blotches of light and shade where the shadow mixed with light. What do you mean? You seem to be afraid of their guns. Who are you? Why are you here? Are you prisoners, sausages? You're a militians, just like them. Then why are they guarding you? We have a slight problem, that's all. Each of us here is for a different reason. Two of us sitting under the tree, they are a former different gang, and they want to join this gang. So they are being watched for a day or two to make sure they are who they claim to be. That one next to him, blue shirt, he is being punished. He used to be one of the professor's top men. He was sent to buy boats from a foreign dealer, and somehow he lost a lot of money in the transaction. I don't know how much, but the professor is very angry with him. Very, very, very angry. See the one over there? He's a past sitting by himself. Well, he made a mistake. He brought back the wrong hostage. The man he pointed to was seated at the very edge of the countryside, cast by trees. He was a fair-skinned, balding man, dressed in green military fatigues, mostly now torn and dirty. His head bowed between the knees, exposing the round bald spot on his back of his head. The professor needed to raise money quick to pay for a consignment of guns he was expecting from overseas, so he sent that guy over there. His name was Monday. The assignment was simple. Take some of the boys and enough guns and boats and everything you need. Go to one of the oil companies in Port Harcourt and kidnap a foreign oil worker and bring him back. Well, he went, and he returns with this cheerful-looking man who keeps saying they're making a terrible mistake kidnapping him. Well, they didn't listen to him. They locked him up in one of the tents over there, reserved for such purposes. They sent the ransom to the man, and they waited for the company to get in touch so they can begin negotiations, but surprisingly, the company shows no interest. Meanwhile, the hostage is treated like any other hostage. Very good food, everything he needs. Then, even being a doctor is seen when he has a problem. Well, eventually discovered he was wrong. The hostage was not a white man at all, despite his very fair skin. You know what he was? An albino. And here he was eating the best food and sleeping all day as if he was on vacation. Very funny, isn't it? What do they call this place? Forest. And you? What is the reporter doing here? I was thinking about Forest together, all with the man over there. If I could talk to the professor, I can prove who I am. Don't worry, the professor will see you eventually. His men will tell him what you said, and he will want to verify if it's true. I just hope you can prove who you are, you claim to be. And when he said that, the man suddenly lost interest in me. Came back to his spot and to his ruminations. Ooh. Oh, that was a long chapter. Oh, Lord. 30 minutes. Jesus. That was a long one. Oh, I think this is I read 2, no? I started at 18. I started at... Yeah, I started at 18. I'll start at 2 chapters. 2 more chapters. 2 more chapters. We'll take a break here. We'll let 2 more chapters go by. Yep, that's what we'll do.